friends. I'm Karen, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. Learning to cook starts slowly, and then you gain momentum as you get better at the basic tasks, at multitasking, and you grow in confidence and experience, and then your knowledge and skill just increases exponentially. And I think it's great for kids to learn to cook before they leave home. I couldn't cook very much at all at the beginning, and we mainly ate either frozen meals made for us by my mom or prepackaged meals from the supermarket with a few homemade things in the middle there. But I felt very intimidated by cooking and by big chunks of meat. Wouldn't know what to do with those. I was intimidated by cooking in the oven. These days, we have so many amazing tools, many more than we had then. And it's so great to know how to use those. And I think that somebody starting out cooking, who's going to be leaving home to start out on their own, or who are getting married, ladies and gents, I think it's so important to learn how to cook. So I'm going to talk about, in a couple of different episodes, how to get started with learning to cook. We can talk about what exactly are good things to learn first, to start with. What mains, what sides, what sauces, or just a simple meal consisting of a main and a side and maybe a sauce to add interest. So once you get the basics down, then you can start to use those in different ways to mix and match. And then you start to grow exponentially in your cooking skills. So let's talk about what are good things to start with when you're learning to cook. One of the most useful things to learn to cook, I think, is chicken breasts. You can easily buy a pack of 4 chicken breasts at the supermarket, and then cook them in the oven or on the stove top. So let's say you were going to cook the chicken breasts in the oven. The easiest and simplest way to do this is to put them in a casserole dish or a glass dish that is oven safe. You simply put the chicken breasts in. They should be spaced out a little bit, have space around them so that they cook well and evenly and the air can circulate. And then you can put either a little bit of olive oil or a little bit of butter on each chicken breast. And then season. You've got to season. The more you season, the better. Obviously, you could overdo it, but it's unlikely. I like to add lots of salt. We just add it to the top. You don't need to flip the chicken breasts. We add a little bit of pepper, not too much. Herbs, if you like Italian herbs or Greek herbs. We like to add oregano or thyme. And then you can add some smoked paprika, some onion powder, any kind of spices that you enjoy, perhaps a little bit of chili powder, but go slow with that. And then you put the oven on to 350 Fahrenheit, 180 Celsius, and you cook them for 20 to 25 minutes. You need to take them out and test if they're done by cutting them in half and looking. They need to be well cooked, but they still need to be tender, not overly dry or overdone. Then what I like to do once I take them out is to kind of mix them with the juices. So the juices will be all around from the oil and from the chicken. So you can just gently use a spoon to pour that over the chicken breasts, or just mix them around with a spoon and they'll be immersed in the liquid, and this helps them to be nice and moist when you eat them. Then you can either fridge them or serve them. So these are so versatile. You can shred them a little bit and put them on top of a potato. You can slice them and put a sauce on. You can cut them up and use them in a chicken stir fry. You can just keep them whole and eat them however you like. So these are great. To cook them on the stove top, it's often best to cut them up. Otherwise, the middle won't cook so well and they'll dry out on the outside. So you can cut them up into cubes or slices. Then you put a little bit of coconut oil I like to use, or tallow, something in the pan to stop it from sticking. And then you put in the pieces of sliced chicken. Then you need to season pretty soon. So you would add salt and pepper as soon as you put them in, and then you start to toss them. And again, you can add similar spices like smoked paprika, onion powder, but don't add those too early because they can burn in a pan. So it's best to start with just the salt and pepper and then cook them for a while and then add the other spices like the onion powder and paprika and things like thyme, herbs as well. Do best a little bit later in the cooking process. Then you can add something like soy sauce or tamari to give it an Asian flavor and add a little bit of honey. That always tastes good. You can add sesame seeds to that. So good sesame seed chicken is usually a little bit of soy sauce, a little bit of honey, and the sesame seeds. Sesame seeds you add near the end so they don't burn, but they roast a little bit. If you want to make a barbecue flavor, then after you've added your seasonings, you can add some tomato paste and a little bit of honey. Gives you a nice barbecue flavor. Just go slow with the honey. If you'd rather mix up the sauce before adding it, you can whisk it in a bowl. So then about a tablespoon of honey and 2 tablespoons of tomato paste or even tomato puree and a tiny little capful of balsamic vinegar or apple cider vinegar also adds flavor to that. And you can test and try things. Don't be afraid to experiment a little bit, especially as you start to get experience and see what flavors you enjoy. The other one that's easy is some bolognese or ground beef. You can combine ground pork and ground beef, or you can just have ground beef. You probably don't want to use the extra lean because less fat, it's not as tasty, but the lean is good because then there's not too much fat, but there is a little bit. And first you want to put that into your pot and add a little bit of coconut oil and stir it around a little bit as it browns to break up the lumps. You're going to start to season it while you're doing that, so add salt and pepper, quite a bit. And then as soon as it's getting done, you can add more seasonings like herbs, again, onion powder. And then you want to add some tomato paste and some tomato puree, perhaps a tin of tomato and onion. What you can also do is chop up an onion and brown that before you add the ground beef to the pan so that you get the good onion flavor as well. Then you can add garlic. And as soon as it's cooked, start tasting it to see what you think. It's really important to taste your food because then you can adjust the seasonings to how you like it and you get used to seeing what it needs to complete the dish. I find adding some fresh basil leaves near the end adds such great flavor, makes it a good bolognese. So now you have your bolognese sauce with ground beef and you have your cooked chicken. So from this you can do so much. By the way, if you don't want to start with chicken breasts, buy a rotisserie chicken and then just pull the meat off it yourself, and you can use that in a similar way in lots of things like stir fry. So now you have your mains and you can start to think about sides and sauces. So the obvious things are sides of potato, like baked potato, roast potatoes, rice, noodles, spaghetti or other pasta. So when you're learning to cook, start with one of those. I think that baked potatoes are probably the easiest. All you need to do is put potatoes, washed potatoes, onto a baking tray, add a little bit of olive oil or butter on top and lots of salt with the skins on, and then you just put them in the oven, 400 Fahrenheit, 200 Celsius, and you bake them for about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the size of the potatoes. So it's good to have evenly sized potatoes so that they cook at more or less the same time. And then you just take them out. They'll be crispy. They'll be delicious. You can store them in the fridge. I wouldn't put potatoes into the freezer once they're cooked because they become quite watery. But the fridge works fine. So now you've got your chicken or your minced bolognese and you've got your potatoes. Something else that's great to do with your baked potatoes, when you take them out the oven, grab a potato masher and gently squish each potato until the skin has popped open and it's squished down a bit. They're called crashed or smashed potatoes. Then add a bit of salt, a little bit of oregano and some Parmesan cheese, and pop them back in the oven for a few minutes to crisp up. Those are really great to have with mince instead of your baked potato. Or let's say you want to do pasta. Let's start with something easy like penne, the tubes of pasta. So what you're going to do is fill a pot about 2/3 full of water, and you turn it on to start heating. When it's almost at a boil, then you're going to add a little bit of coconut oil with a spoon so that it's not going to stick together, and some salt. They say on MasterChef, salt like the ocean. So quite a bit of salt. The water can come to the boil with the lid on because it's quicker, but then you should take it off once you're ready to cook the pasta. Then as soon as it's boiling, you just dump the pasta into the boiling water, and you use something like a spaghetti spoon that I spoke about in episode 19. So you stir it up with something that will break up the pasta if there's any clumping, and then you let it cook. It won't take long, probably about 5 minutes, and then you need to be ready to taste. So when it starts to look right, or a bit earlier if you're unsure, take a piece out and taste it. So when it tastes almost ready, perhaps a little more al dente, as they say, a little more chewy than you would like, then you should take it out because it will soften a little bit more. So then you can take a colander, put it in the sink, and drain the pasta into that, and then put it straight back into the pot. You can leave a tiny bit of the pasta water in because it helps to soften it. Then when you've got your pasta, cooked pasta in the pot, you can add a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of salt, and perhaps a little bit of Parmesan cheese, and that really adds flavor. When you're cooking, it's so important to taste all the parts before you put them together. So you're going to taste your bolognese, that it tastes good and that it doesn't need anything added. Perhaps you'll add more salt, pepper if you want to. Don't add things like spices and onion powder at the end because those need to be cooked in with the meal. But things like salt are fine, and perhaps yogurt or cream, those work fine. As I mentioned, basil leaves. And then with your cooked pasta, you want to make sure that it tastes good as well. So adding the Parmesan, the salt, the olive oil really helps it to taste good. So now you've got 2 different kinds of meat. You've got 2 sides. So let's talk about 2 sauces that you can easily add to those to make it a bit more interesting. So say you choose your baked potato with some slices of chicken breast on top. A very easy and delicious sauce for that is a similar sauce to what you would find on a shrimp cocktail. It's a pink sauce, and it works great on chicken and potato. And it's cold. You serve it as a cold sauce. So what you do is you take some mayonnaise, about half a cup of mayonnaise. You add a squirt of lemon juice, a couple of squirts of ketchup or tomato sauce, and a little bit of salt. And you mix those together. And then adjust it to what you like. Perhaps you like it a little bit more tomatoey, perhaps more mayonnaise. But that makes a great pink sauce. Easy. Stick that on your chicken, on top of your potato dish. Then if you wanted a hot sauce, perhaps you take your pasta and you take your chicken and you shred it up and you mix it with the pasta. Now you want a sauce on top. In future episodes, we'll learn about a cheese sauce, which is a little more complex. But a very easy sauce to do is a cream sauce. For this, you can take perhaps the scrapings of your chicken, if there's any liquid left after cooking it. But if you don't have those, then don't worry. Put those into a saucepan, then add a container of cream. Doesn't really matter what size, just whatever you have. And then you cook that slightly. You don't want it to boil because it can make the cream less digestible, but it can simmer. And then you add salt and you just let it boil for a little bit. Sorry, you just let it simmer, not boil, for a little bit until it's a little bit thicker. And then you simply pour that over your chicken. To make it a little bit more interesting, you can do a mushroom cream sauce. So you start by slicing some mushrooms, adding salt and a little onion powder and a tiny bit of nutmeg. Brings out the flavor in the mushrooms. Then you put some coconut oil in a pan. You cook up the mushrooms a little bit. When they're starting to cook, put a lid over the pan so that it can cook them without them burning. And then when they're pretty much cooked, you take the lid off and you pour your cream over the mushrooms, and then you just give it a minute or two to simmer. As I said before, you can add a little bit of salt if necessary, taste it to see how it tastes, and that's lovely to pour over your chicken and your potatoes, or even over your pasta. You can have a simple pasta with the mushroom sauce. And then obviously you can do pasta with bolognese as well, and just put some grated cheese on top, and you have a great meal. So those are very simple but nutritious, easy, and a great way to learn to cook from scratch without having to buy pre-made meals from the supermarket. Next time we'll talk about other things you can make when you're learning to cook that are a little bit more advanced. Things like chicken curry, chicken stir fry with noodles, omelets. So all these things are relatively easy and you'll already be on your way. So happy cooking, and thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.